Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to What Makes You Tick. Today's guest is Irish international rugby player Caelan Doris. He has agreed to join with me and sit down and talk about all things that make him tick, so we can get to know him a little bit better. Caelan, how are you?
I'm well, yeah. Glad to finally get around to doing this a year or so on. But look forward to chatting and catching up.
I'm definitely persistent anyway, that's for sure. When you're in the radars, when you're in the crosshairs, there's no getting away. No, it's great to have you on, pal. And look forward to chatting with you. I suppose what makes you tick, as I've said in the preamble to yourself before we started recording, is all about trying to learn from others and to kind of take a little bit of influence and inspiration from what others have done so that we can apply it to our own lives. And this is a personal project of mine. So it's just, I love speaking to people because I'm learning from every different conversation. And I know from feedback that other people are learning as well. So I'm sure we'll have tons to learn as a young man in his prime, and we're learning tons from you already. So it's great.
Fair play for doing it. It's a great idea. I've got a big interest in people and psychology and personality and what makes people tick as well. So great idea. Fair play for doing it.
Brilliant. I actually did a sports psychology course there back in a few years ago with Dr. Olivia Hurley, and a few of your teammates actually have done it as well. But it's super to understand the kind of the different stages in sport for athletes when they get injured, especially how they go through a kind of a grieving model. But that I didn't realize that it was quite similar to, say, when somebody passes, the same thing happens. An athlete, they go through all those kind of 5 stages. And when I was doing the course, it was such a mind blower, because you think you understand how people work, or you think you might have an insight, but then when the psychology comes into it, it's a different game. Anyway, listen. So first question I have for you. You're a professional rugby player. You've played for a number of years now, and you are playing for Ireland on a regular basis now. Why is it that why do you do what you do?
Big question to start with. It's funny, like I was saying to you before we started recording, we've started doing What Makes Me Tick presentations in Leinster. So I had mine last week, and I've put quite a bit of thought into it. And there's a few sort of big points that came to me when I was preparing for it. And family is obviously probably the main one, the first big one anyway. I grew up in Mayo. Both my parents are from Dublin, but they raised a family in Mayo, myself and a brother who's 2 years older than me. So we grew up out west, pretty rural part of Mayo as well, North Mayo, Lacken it's called, right in the beach. Lovely little spot there. But yeah, I'm very grateful to them for probably quite a diverse childhood and diverse memories they gave us. All my family, bar obviously my close family, were in Dublin, so we would have had that traveling between the two quite a bit, the rural side of things, but also seeing and visiting family and friends in Dublin as well. They're both psychotherapists. My dad is an artist as well, again, which is in your probably classical jobs for rural Mayo as well. So that was a bit different too. And we traveled quite a bit. So I'd been to India a few times when I was younger, Croatia. I think I'd been to 20 or so countries during primary school. So traveled and saw a lot of the world.
Jesus, yeah.
And also sort of got interested in people and different cultures and psychology as well. So between what my parents did and the experiences and the memories they gave me when I was younger, I think that's where my interest in psychology came from. And I ended up studying psychology in UCD, did my undergrad there. And I've gone on to do some of my own therapy and learn a bit more about myself as well. I've just started doing some recently again, which is a pretty interesting experience. But to bring it all back, I think quite a bit about how rich a childhood they gave me and how diverse and all the different memories and experiences, and wanting to pay them back with good memories and good days out. And I've got a pretty good way of doing that through the rugby. So having big days for them, not just my immediate family, but the wider family as well. I see sometimes pictures of them going to games even more recently now. You appreciate it all the more after COVID and not having fans. But having all them and seeing the crack they have around game days is definitely something that drives me on and makes me want to have more big days and be involved in the big days so they can be too. Yes, that's definitely one big one anyway. Then we had a psychologist in with us in camp back in November now, a fella called Ronan Conway. And it was sort of a bonding experience. It was one of Andy Farrell's newest or original first few camps. So it was a new bunch and obviously new coaches as well. So it was kind of, the meaning of it was to get to know people on a deeper level as well. But he asked us to do a visualization exercise where we pictured ourselves as 3 or 4 year old kids, seeing where we are today, and just how fortunate we are and how delighted would be as whatever 3 or 4 year old kid to see that you're in the position to play for Ireland and playing for Leinster and just being a professional rugby player in general, how fortunate we are and how so many people don't get to live their childhood dreams. So that's a pretty big one. And what's coupled with that then is trying to fulfill my potential, trying to get the best out of myself, the most out of myself, and not have any regrets when I finish, and do that little, whatever, 3 or 4 year old fella proud, knowing that it's where he's wanted to be all along. What sort of reinforced that was my brother, who's 2 years older, like I said, when we were on holidays in Croatia, when I was 10, he was 12, and went down a water slide head first. I had actually just gone down before him and was okay, was unharmed, but he went down straight after, and whatever angle he hit the pool at the bottom, he went head first into the ground. It was only whatever 3 or 4 meters deep, the pool, and went head first into the ground and split his head open, was concussed quite badly, and sort of had post-concussive symptoms for a few years, really. If you try to exert at all, anything from gym, exercise to like an ardent day of study or whatever, a full day of school, he'd be wiped out for a few days. Sort of flu-like symptoms he'd get, and that lasted pretty much for his whole secondary school. Started to clear up, maybe first year college for him, so only 5 or 6 years ago now. Thankfully he's fully okay now and he's overcome it. But the fact that I saw sport being taken away from him so suddenly, and it having been such a big part of his life and mine, and then that being gone all of a sudden, that definitely reinforces how lucky I am to be in the position I'm in. So yeah, like sport was huge for the two of us. There was always a ball being thrown around between us, and then kind of all of a sudden it was gone. So yeah, it was pretty strange. And yeah, he's doing really, really well now, thankfully. And he's probably actually thankful of the experience, and it's made him probably a lot stronger, but also it led him in a different direction. He's kind of gone into, it led him to personal development and high performance and peak performance and neuroscience and that sort of area. So he's gone on to, like I was saying to you before, he's living in the States, and he's formed a company called the Flow Research Collective, which basically look into flow state and high performance, peak performance. And they do trainings. He's partnered with a fellow called Stephen Kotler, who's pretty well known in that area. He's written a few books. You'd probably actually be interested in checking them out. The Flow Research Collective, you'll find them online. But yeah, all that head injury stuff led him to where he is today as well. So
isn't it mental to think that okay, obviously sport was a massive part of your growing up, but isn't it mad to think how things work out in certain ways? And because it brings me to a kind of like a question that I would have for you, is that what's been your biggest challenge, and whether it's on the pitch or off the pitch. So like obviously last year you had a couple of issues with concussion, right? And I love the fact that you took your time to kind of figure it out and to kind of get your head around it, for want of a word. But to have a brother who's in an area then who kind of understands it as well and kind of understands the severity of it, like how important was it to have, I suppose, his experience and knowing what he went through as a part of your kind of recovery and rehabilitation process?
Yeah, it probably was helpful. It's funny though, like people around me anyway probably think that part of my worries stemmed from what had happened to him, but I kind of, in a funny way, I was able to kind of disconnect and see my experience as different. I mean, his was one severe head injury, which then led to the problems he had, but mine were quite different. I obviously had the two pretty severe ones as well, one against Treviso and one against Scotland in my debut 4 minutes in. So I had those two, and then I'd had one when I was younger as well, where I was knocked out for a number of seconds. So that was three sort of quite bad ones. But I hadn't really had any symptoms after those. Little bit of grogginess, as you'd expect, but no lasting headaches or lasting effects. I was fine the next morning after all three. But we obviously had that long break then with COVID. So I had gone back to 2019. I'd had that one against Treviso. Then I had another against Scotland a couple of months on. So the break was probably a good thing for me. Usually if you have 2 or 3 in a season, they recommend taking a break anyway. So I kind of got that before it was forced on me, which at the time I was thinking was a positive. I was trying to look for positives in the COVID situation, even though obviously it was pretty frustrating having just started my international career, my first couple of games for Ireland, and then that comes in. But I was trying to find the positives, and that was definitely one. But yeah, then fast forward on a few months and we're back playing, and hadn't had any problems, thankfully. The break did its job. And then around Christmas time, I'd gotten a knock or two. We played Munster, I think, January 2020 maybe, and I'd gotten a bit of a knock, not knocked out, or whether it was concussive or not it's kind of a little bit of a grey area, but I'd had a few of these sort of knocks to the head and a little bit shook, a little bit dazed. I'm sure you probably experienced some of them as well.
Plenty.
Throughout the years. Yeah, but they were sort of a little bit in that grey area. Sometimes I would feel a little bit sort of rattled for a few minutes. Other times it would go away after a couple of seconds, and very rarely did I have lasting effects in terms of headaches or nausea or anything like that after the games. So these were kind of going on for a little while, and they were pretty infrequent, but getting gradually more frequent as we were approaching the Six Nations. So I had that one against Munster, and then we had a training game against Ulster the week before the Six Nations. We were in camp, and I got another knock, and it was probably the threshold for the knock was maybe a little bit lower than it had been. And I sort of stumbled a little bit as I got up, and didn't feel quite right for maybe a minute or 30 seconds or something. And I was kind of gradually getting a little bit more worried. I was kind of thinking, oh, they're fine, everyone gets these. But then that one worried me a little bit more because the threshold, it probably wasn't that big a knock to the head, and then the stumbles and wobbles after. So I think even prior to that, I'd spoken to the doc and said that I was a little bit worried about these and wanted to see a specialist or just get checked out just to have that going on in the background, but was still happy to play. But then that one against Ulster, I said to him again, we looked at the footage, and I sort of said I wanted to get these fully checked out before I continued playing. And I'm very grateful to the medical staff in both Ireland and Leinster for letting me do that, and facilitating it all as well. I think within 24 hours or 48 hours of that one against Ulster, I was getting checked out by a neurologist in Beaumont, and he did a battery of different tests, and sort of concluded that I was okay. He wasn't too sure what these knocks were, whether they were subconcussive or concussive or somewhere in that grey area. But I still wanted to look in a bit further, get cognitive tests, scans, the whole shebang. So I'm pretty glad I've done all that. I've sort of got tested on all fronts, from cognitive, balance, memory, everything, brain scans. So if there are ever worries again in the future, I can always come back and compare to this.
You've got a benchmark. You've got a benchmark exactly. Now. Yeah. But doesn't it stand out the fact that traditionally, say in the rugby world before the professional side of things, and even for a while during the professional side of things when it had transferred over, is that it was just keep going. Whereas you had the wherewithal and the kind of the I suppose the maturity to go, no, stop. Let's just stop. Let's just do take a breath, everybody, and let's just take a breath and step back and see actually what's going on, and let's get complete clarity. Because I suppose it's super to hear that you got to do that, but it's even more, it's even better to hear that you had the support from the province, from Leinster and from the IRFU to go and do that, to make sure that you're okay. Because obviously they want somebody playing who feels that they're 100%, right?
Yeah, it was definitely a tough decision as well. It was just approaching the Six Nations. The Lions was on that year. I knew I needed a big Six Nations if I wanted to go on the Lions. And they were all goals for me that I had set at the start of the season. So it took quite a bit of thinking. Do I push on and sort of forget about these and maybe get it checked after the summer, or do I just keep going? But I was pretty worried about them at that stage. The worry had sort of built up in the background, and I'd sort of kind of pushed it to the side and said, I'll be fine. These are grand. I can get them checked at the end of the season if they're still going on. But I was worried about sort of cognitive things, like even, short-term memory and concentration and stuff. So it was getting bigger and bigger, really, the worry. And it kind of culminated in that one with the Ulster one, where it was a slightly worse knock as well. So it was a hard decision, and I am glad that I did it in the end, because I think, like, the advice I got going to Birmingham, the first guy, like I said, he was sort of a little bit blasé, maybe he wasn't too worried, and then going to the fella in Birmingham when I got the MRI, the functional MRI, all that stuff, and he was sort of saying, like, he also said they're maybe a little bit in the grey area, but you've got to treat them as concussive. So take the full whatever 2 months, 3 months off, focus on tackle tech, focus on neck strength. There's a certain amount of things you can do to minimize the chance of them reoccurring. Yeah. The unfortunate thing with concussion is that the more you get, the more likely you are to get more. Yeah. But obviously a break kind of resets your brain in a way, lets it fully recover, along with neck strength, which minimizes the whiplash effect. Tackle technique is obviously huge, putting your head in the right place. I also did a gradual exposure to try and build my threshold back up. So I did a lot of work with your mate Hugh Hogan, actually, who was great during the whole process. But starting off at sort of 50% bag hits, and gradually, session by session, building that up to a full contact without a bag. So it was probably a pretty challenging time in lots of ways, and the worry that was there as well, and the anxiety around it. Even things like my speech, I was sort of a little bit worried about, but again, it's hard to tell if that was actually going on, or it's the fact you're getting these hits, you're hearing about what's going on over in England with the retired players, and you're overthinking it. So every time you can't remember someone's name, or you slightly stutter or stumble your words, you're thinking, oh shit, that must be from these. Yeah. So you're kind of hyper aware in a way, of hyper vigilant as well, of every time something like that does happen, you're attributing it straight to these knocks, which mightn't be the case at all. And
how old are you now, Caelan?
I'm 23 now.
23. So you still have a huge career ahead of you, right? And you're still so young. I think what this does, though, is it should give encouragement to young people who are trying to make it, who are trying to kind of break through and to get their opportunities, is that to have that kind of, obviously, that resilience and patience to be able to say, listen, if something doesn't feel right, I can still follow my dream, but I just need to get things sorted now. What would you say to, say, parents now who are worried about that type of thing, about concussion, like pulling their kids from sport because of the concussion stories and issues?
Yeah, I think first of all, we know so much more now than we do even 20 years ago. Even at the start of professional rugby, they weren't really treated with proper care. Lads often would get fully knocked out and play on and finish games, whereas now it's pretty meticulous in how they're looked after and handled, and the return to play protocols. So all of that is pretty well set in place. And I think we're definitely in good hands, and there's ongoing studies into it and into how it impacts the brain and recovery. And I think like we're in a way better place than 20 years ago or so. I think in terms of younger players or people who might have worries like me or had worries like me, I think getting it checked out as early as possible. I'd probably, going back now, knowing what I know, I probably would have gotten checked even earlier. I think the earlier you get checked, the more likely, obviously, you're going to be okay, but also the less likely you're going to have to take an extended break. So if I had gotten checked, I don't know, a month or so earlier, then I potentially could have got all this in the background, all the tests going on in the background while I was still playing, instead of having to take that extended break. So I just advise getting it done as soon as possible. Don't let it build up. Don't wait around. Get it done.
Well, I mentioned earlier about what's been your biggest challenge. Do you think that's been your biggest challenge, or do you think there's something else?
No, I think that one, with the sort of the magnitude of how big the effects of the decision were, in terms of, like I said, missing the Six Nations and having the Lions at the end of the year. It was kind of, again, like I said, it was in the background and was building up and sort of culminated with that last knock I got. So I'm pretty proud about how I did sort of. It was probably a pretty prudent decision, and quite a mature one as well. But I'm definitely glad I did it.
Good man. Yeah, I think it kind of leads me on to the next question, which would be like you're still 23, but you're a young, fit and healthy man now, right? But you still have a lot to offer in terms of both sport and everything. But what would you advise, say, if you were talking to yourself now as you were starting off again and you were coming into this whole world? Because I remember when you came up to St. Mary's, you were just after tearing your hamstring playing for the Irish 20s. Remember that? And you were trying to make it back for the World Cup, I think it was. It was a similar kind of injury that Paul O'Connell got, right? But I always thought that you approached every challenge quite rationally, you know. Maybe that's what you were like on the outside. Maybe inside it was a different story, but you seem to kind of come across things quite rationally. Like I remember yourself and Geordie would come down to the club, and even though you couldn't play or train, you always then either held a water bottle or were doing something on the side of the pitch to be part of the team in different ways. And I thought that was super mature, because there was a lot of guys who played professional rugby who were affiliated with the club but would never even come to the club, you know. And that's what I thought was really brilliant to see, because it just showed that you actually gave a shit about the club and the lads and the team and all that stuff, which was brilliant. And when you could play, you played. But what advice, I suppose, would you give a young fella coming through, or young person coming through?
I absolutely love my time in Mary's. There's a few nicknames that I got that maybe aren't suitable for this, but
that's okay.
It's great crew down there. Even still now, Dino's back playing. Sean Cronin, Nuggets coaching. Smithy's back doing a bit as well. It's great crew again. But what would I tell a younger me? The enjoyment piece. I always hear a lot of people saying, try and enjoy it from the start, or you wouldn't do it if you didn't enjoy it. And I've since I was younger, I've tried to take that message on board as well, which I think is a very important piece of it all. Like I was saying with that visualization process, sometimes now you can get carried away by maybe the pressures of it or the injuries or some of the downs. But I think there's so many ups as well, and just it really is a dream job. So the enjoyment piece is huge, and we talk quite a bit about that in Leinster as well. Making sure we have a smile on our faces and having a laugh each day. So I think that's definitely a huge part of it. Probably less so to do with the rugby, but maybe more so to do, I suppose it's to do with rugby, but also to do with life in general. It's kind of touching on mental health things as well, but just speaking to people, just talk to people. If you've got something going on, just talk to someone as early as possible. I think in Ireland especially, it's less so now, but there's a stigma around not being okay. I think just being as open and honest as possible, people appreciate, and people see the courage and the strength in doing that. So it's probably through my brother's injury, he obviously required a lot of attention and saw a lot of specialists, and I probably learned to be a little bit more independent and manage my own feelings or worries or emotions a bit more myself. And even going back prior to that in our childhood, he probably required a bit more attention than me. So I sort of learned to be a bit more independent and maybe keep my feelings towards myself, and sort of said, I'm able to manage these. And thankfully there wasn't any massive anxieties or stresses that I had, but it was sort of through that concussion process that I sort of started talking more openly and more freely with my parents about any little worries or anxieties I had, and with friends as well. And that's something that I've tried to continue on and take as a positive out of that whole experience. Just being more open and honest around any sort of little anxiety or stress, or just getting it off my chest and sharing it with someone. I think everyone has certain edges or certain things that cause them a bit of worry or anxiety, and the common thing to do is just to hold on to it ourselves and manage it ourselves. But I think by sharing it, it's a problem shared is a problem halved, is so true. So I think that's an important message to spread as well, and that's something that I'd now tell my younger self.
I think that's super. It is tricky, isn't it, to do it the first time? The hardest time is the first time. But then I think when you do it the first time, you realize how much love and support is out there for you and from others. Because especially with guys, obviously mental health is huge across the world, and we're seeing it in sport, how people in sport have reached certain heights and the pressure has gotten to them, and unfortunately they haven't been able to manage the situations. And I think if you do share that story, or if you do it, tell somebody how you're feeling for the first time, the relief and the release that you get is incredible, because it's not you holding it anymore, it's with somebody else. And then it gives you the confidence and the courage to kind of keep up that process, because it is a process, and it's a learned process. It's a habit, right? You're trying to build really positive habits to ensure then that you have a positive kind of lifestyle and an optimistic one. I think, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, go on. I think also what you find is that other people have very similar things going on to you, and it's just not spoken about. I love the quote, Carl Rogers, a famous psychologist, what is most personal is most universal, which I think is a really good one. Just everyone's got things going on. They're just not completely spoken about, but I think by speaking about them, it helps yourself and others as well. So.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few other quotes you have in your locker there that you could probably share as well. But it is super. Speaking of Carl Rogers, I suppose the question I have for you now is in terms of influence and people, because you obviously have a huge interest in psychology after studying it, but I'm sure there's like what's his name? There's a lad from the 70s that I used to listen to, and he basically what the hell is his name? I'll come back to me, but basically he says when it comes to decision making, he says decisions are like hiccups. They pop up when you least expect them, but you basically, whatever decision you make is the right decision. You know, we gather so much, we spend so much time trying to gather all the information about whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. And then ultimately we probably make the same decision that we made initially in that first moment, you know. And I think it's so true. If I can find it, I'll stick it in the show notes. But this guy in the 70s, he helped me get through a lot of stuff a couple of years back when I was kind of feeling a bit shitty. But in terms of influence, who would you say, or what do you think has been the biggest influence in your life?
Probably family. I think, speaking a fair bit about my brother already, how he's turned that adversity into a massive strength for him, and how he's overcome it and is doing so well now. I think he's also been extremely supportive of me throughout my career. When obviously sport was taken away from him, and he could have been kind of sour or jealous over it. Maybe was for a couple of years, but for the majority, he's been very supportive, and has always sort of given me great advice and learnings, and shared his learnings, and has given me a lot of. It's been a big influence in terms of sort of high performance, everything from goal setting to positive routines to mindfulness to mental health stuff. So yeah, he's been huge. Then also my parents, obviously, as well, for, like I mentioned earlier, all the memories and the pretty eclectic childhood they gave me. But also probably they overcame quite a few adversities, and more than adversities, really pretty heavy traumas that they had in their childhoods as well, which probably is what led them, partly anyway, to being psychotherapists themselves and helping others. But I think the pair of them have a great attitude towards life, are big into, pretty open-minded and big into experiencing different things, and open-minded around people and getting to know people. So yeah, they also sort of were pretty laissez-faire in their approach to parenting, and never were overly forceful or pushed us too much into doing anything we didn't want to do. We were always kind of gently encouraged to be as active as possible and play sports and try different things and learn an instrument and all that sort of stuff, but always in a pretty gentle and compassionate way. And I think that's benefited both me and my brother Ian.
Do you think it would be something that you would pursue after rugby?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure how exactly. I don't think I'll be a therapist, but yeah, it's definitely something I'm interested in, and I want to do a master's in psychology. I'm not sure exactly in what yet, whether it be sports or more so neuroscience or high performance, or yeah, some area of psychology anyway. Yeah, I find it fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super. I could listen to you all day, and I'm sure like we're only touching the tip of the iceberg here when it comes to the areas that you're interested in. Alan Watts was the name of that psychologist, or that lad. Yeah. I don't know if you ever heard of him. But yeah, super guy, and some really good stuff. So it kind of leads me then to ask you then, what's the future hold? You know, what's ahead of Caelan Doris now over the next couple of years? And obviously you don't want to get too ahead of yourself, I'm sure, but like what way do you look towards the future, and how do you kind of plan it?
The immediate future is pretty exciting anyway. Like I was saying pre-recording, we're going into camp tomorrow. 3 big games: Japan, All Blacks, and Argentina. So that's my next month covered anyway. Pretty busy with camp, and hopefully preparing for those games as well. So yeah, hugely excited by that. A little bit more long term, it's enjoying my rugby, getting the most out of myself, working hard, and hopefully seeing progression on the pitch. Then, like I said, around the psychology part of things, I want to do a master's. I want to learn more about that. I'm also going to be doing therapy for the next while anyway. I only started 3 or 4 weeks ago. I'm doing it weekly at the minute, and yeah, it's a pretty interesting learning experience. Even some of what I've spoken about there today is kind of, it's like piecing a puzzle together of why you are how you are, and maybe certain things that cause you some anxiety, piecing back to your childhood, or seeing why you are like that and overcoming them as well through talking about it, and healing those younger parts maybe.
So Caelan, you're doing therapy on a weekly basis, is it?
Yeah. So both with my interest in psychology and what my parents do, I've always said I'd try it and give it a go. I did maybe 5 or 10 sessions my first year out of school. My parents were going through a bit of a rough patch, and I was sort of the middleman in a way. So I used it as an extra support during that. Didn't sort of get into anything too deep. But I always said I'd come back to it and try it again. And I thought now would be a pretty good time. So I just started again with new therapists, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I'm finding it pretty interesting. Piecing different bits of your childhood together and why you are who you are, and sort of becoming more resilient through it, I guess, and overcoming any issues or problems that I may have. It's also it's been part of the process in being more open about it and talking to friends about it more. I'm lucky in that I'm not experiencing any severe anxiety or depression or anything like that. It's more just sort of light stuff and getting to know myself a bit better and sharing any anxieties I do have with friends, and obviously with this guy, and learning more about myself in general. But I said it in Leinster a few weeks ago now that I was doing it, and it's surprising the amount of people who've been like, oh yeah, I've done some myself, or I found it good. It's just not really openly spoken about again. But yeah, my brother's living in Venice in California, in LA, and it's the opposite end of the spectrum there.
Yeah,
where
everybody's got a therapist.
Exactly. Yeah. So somewhere in between might be good, but no, I think there's definitely room for improvement in how we.
It's great that you're doing it though, because like sometimes I grew up with a stigma for therapy. I grew up going that it's a sign of weakness, right? And I had this whole kind of uneducated approach to it until I went through it, until I started myself about 3 years ago or so. And it was only from doing that then I was like, Jesus, this is actually brilliant. Like it's so helpful. It gives you a different perspective of how to look at a challenge, and then gets you thinking about, bring it back to you, right? So I can't control how you are. I can't control what anybody else does, but I can only control myself, my own feelings, and what I do about them and how I approach them. And once I kind of took ownership on that, it started changing my perspective on things. I saw things in a far kind of easier challenges. Challenges became a lot easier to solve in certain ways. Obviously, there's still really tough things, right? But I just had a totally different view, and it was so helpful that it's now gotten me to where I am now, in a really, really good relationship, really, really positive, supportive, and kind of we're a good team. And then on top of that, then as well, it's like helped me with my career. Started a brilliant new job there about 8 months ago in the world of sport and advisory. And it's given me kind of like a whole new passion. And it's the first time in a long time that I've been really excited about my future and my career and stuff. So, but I do definitely think that it was as a result of making that little bit of a change and going, okay, why am I going down these certain roads and paths? I need to focus on myself and own it.
That's great to hear. I think there's definitely a misconception, even still, that therapy is sort of only for people with severe anxieties or depression or severe traumas, whereas the reality is it can benefit everybody, even just for personal development sort of stuff, maybe like you were talking about there, or minor anxieties or minor stresses, or just as a weekly sort of counseling or keeping on top of problems. But yeah, I think it's huge, and it's probably going to be a growing area and something that will become more and more common.
Definitely.
Hopefully a few new clients for my parents there through this.
Do you want to put a shout out to where they are? Actually, that's something I just want to say. Is there anything that you're involved in, or anything that you're supporting and that you'd like to kind of mention to people to kind of build a bit of awareness about? Because obviously I'm sure there's a lot of different things going on behind the scenes outside of rugby. But if you want to shout out, and I can put it all into the show notes, feel free. The mic is yours, as they say.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm actually I had a Zoom call with Childline there at the start of the summer. They're doing a sort of a rebranding, which is a little bit delayed, but I think the plan is anyway to do some work with them over the next few months with their rebranding. So I'm looking forward to getting involved with that, because I haven't really worked with any charities before. So looking forward to helping out there.
Great one to be involved in fairness. Really, they do some super work. So I'll put their link anyway into the notes. But Caelan Doris, thank you very much for sharing your story with us and with me personally. It's been brilliant just to get to chat to you again, pal, and just to hang out. It's been a while, so it's lovely to see you. Lovely to see you're doing so well, and really impressed the way you've kind of managed yourself over the last number of years, especially through times where things maybe didn't go the way you had planned, but you saw the positives. And I love the fact that you're looking at the positives in everything, and trying to focus on them as opposed to dwelling on the really tough things and the things that didn't go your way. So you're definitely an inspiration to people both young and old, and I'm sure you've got a really healthy and long rugby career ahead of you, but outside of rugby I'm sure you're going to be super successful as well. So thanks a million for joining me, pal. It's been great.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Great to catch up and chat more.